Oh hey, it's me Tim from before. Today is Black Friday, and every year since I started this channel, like 11, 12 years ago, I've posted a Boycott Black Friday video kind of reminding people to not be victims of this consumer frenzy that happens this time of year, to try to shop local, make things themselves, support the local economy, and all that stuff. And usually what I do is I put up a video of like a little project that you can make yourself with like step-by-step instructions. And that was what I intended to do this year, but then I ran out of time. So I was looking back at all of the previous year Black Friday videos that I've made, and I found this one that I'm resharing with you. Is from 2015, and it's where I make a little ukulele for my son. This is it right here. And so let's watch the video. I do a little bit of, I pause it a couple times and sort of talk over it in the middle, just having a little bit of fun with myself, but and I'll catch you at the end. And right off the bat, that web page no longer exists. It now just points to an About Me page at squaretools.com.
Hey, it's me, Tim Sway. Happy Anti-Black Friday. Now, this is my third annual Anti-Black Friday video.
Anti-Black Friday? I thought I always called it Boycott Black Friday.
In previous years, I've made some slightly simpler projects, but this isn't as scary as it looks. The first year, I made some building blocks for my boy when he was little, and you can watch that video. Last year, I showed you don't even need any power tools, and I made a set of stilts that I ended up giving to my nephew out of another scrap 2x4. Now this year, I made this ukulele for my son who is into music. It's not as hard as it looks. You can do this. So watch the video. I'm going to try and make this sort of short. I'm going to narrate it. Now, yes, I understand what you're thinking. You're like, I could have just gone to the store and spent like $50 and got something like this. You can actually get a Flying V ukulele. I didn't invent that. For $50. And that would be awesome, right? Wrong. It's more than $50.
God, I'm so boring stumbling through how to say this, but this is the same thing I've been saying for well over 10 years now, just this reminder to be responsible with the way we shop. And it's not just the materials and how eco-friendly they are and all that, but also the people that are involved in the process. Sometimes a good deal from overseas means other people have suffered.
Now this, I made out of some recycled materials. I made it with love. And I made it just for him. Now it's special. That $50 thing isn't special. If you can't make stuff yourself, please consider shopping from people that can make stuff locally in your neighborhood. You'd be surprised. There's all sorts of awesome people right in your neighborhood that can do all sorts of awesome and amazing things. Please don't be a consumer sucker this year and just go out and buy a bunch of junk. We don't need to do that anymore. We're better than that. All right, I'm off my soapbox. Watch the video, and then I'll just get next week on my usual soapbox, which is kind of similar.
Well, at least I'm self-aware then of how boring I am, but I wonder if in 10 years I'll listen to this and be like, oh my god, that's so lame.
No, I've never even held a ukulele before, so I had to do a little bit of internet searching to get some basic ideas of some of the measurements. But after doing that, I took this scrap plywood that my neighbor had given me.
This might be before I discovered hollow core doors.
He used it to throw some rocks down on or something while I did some landscaping. And I drew out a basic rough shape and taped two pieces together so I could cut them out and have them match. I, of course, cut a sound hole into it. And then I cut out some 1.5 inch wide strips to make the sides of the body of the guitar. And I glued some hardwood scraps into the corners to give me some solid surfaces there. You'll see that later.
It's also fun to see how my shop used to look.
Now for the neck, I had some teak furniture that had been thrown away that my brother-in-law gave me that I cleaned it up, and there were some pieces of the legs of the tables and chairs that were 3 pieces of 1 inch or 3/4 inch stock.
Not only is this from before I used CNC, which of course I would have done all of this on now, it's also before I invented the squares.
That were glued together. So I already had these pieces laminated together, which were perfect for me to cut out my neck from there, and like butcher block style is stronger, and that's the way guitars tend to be made. There I just popped my bandsaw blade and had to stop. You've got to be real careful measuring everything to make sure you've got the lengths and widths right, but it's not hard, it's just careful and time consuming. And here I'm just taking out from the block of the neck that's going to be into the body the thickness of the top piece of plywood so it'll all sit nice and flush. I'm going to glue it all together right into that block there, as you can see, like that. And then much like the way you make a cabriole leg, I just hot glued the cutout back to the neck so I could have a flat surface and then cut out the second side of the shape. Then the hot glue easily peels apart and I have my neck blank. Of course there was some sanding and planing to do. This glue is amazing, by the way, and I'm not being paid need to say that, which is why I taped over their logo, of course. But I use it to glue a little reinforcement onto the top face of the guitar.
Clarification, I found over the years that basically all CA glue is the same. What I had never used before was the activator, and that was the first time I'd ever experienced that, and that's what I thought was pretty awesome, and I still do.
And then I wanted to put something inside the sound hole, like a logo, and I didn't want to put my logo, so I put Advanced Maker's logo, which I wood burned in there just using some scrap steel I had laying around.
Just watching this today, I thought that was pretty clever.
Luckily, his initial was a V. I had to sort of chamfer the edges of the sides a little bit, and as you can see here, I'm gluing them in. Now, normally a guitar would have this stuff called purfling, which is like a wood that's got little slices in it, so you can bend it around corners and stuff. You can Google purfling and you'll see it. But I didn't find it necessary for this. It's so small, there's so little tension, and there was no curves.
In fact, the reason I made it a flying V shape was so I wouldn't have to deal with curves and I could just do all straight edges. And this is 1/4-inch plywood, so it's pretty thick.
So I just glued it all together, just plywood to plywood. I had those corners that I made out of the hardwood. And then things weren't perfect, so I trimmed them up a little bit. And then I used just Bondo. There's actually wood filler, but to fill in some of the cracks and sand it all down and make it look a little better before priming it. And then, of course, finding all the spots that I missed and having to go back and do some more. And I wanted to give it a fun paint job, so I painted the front red, the back black, and I didn't tape it off so there'd be some overspray. But there wasn't enough, so I added some overspray, as you can see here. I cut the fingerboard out of the same teak. It was a piece that I had cut off when I ripped down the neck.
At this point in time, I had only made a few guitars, and most of them were fretless basses, so I didn't have a lot of experience cutting frets, you'll see. But nowadays I know that you would want to leave your fretboard straight before you cut the fret slots. It gives you some straight edges to work off of, and then create the shape.
Now, the hardest part of making any kind of fretted stringed instrument is actually putting the frets in. There are online fret calculators that you can use, and I'd recommend working in millimeters, as you can see I'm doing here, to help you really accurately mark where you're going to cut your frets in. I built this little jig, you can see this piece of plywood with these straight lines on it, so I really very carefully set everything up nice and straight. I have that fence that I have my triangle on, my square on to help me cut my lines. Now, I had fret wire laying around because I've messed around making instruments before. So I'm using fret wire, I cut the slots. But if you don't have fret wire, you can use nails. And I was going to do it just to show how to do it, but I ended up just using the fret wire because it was easier. But you just have to cut those slots a little wider to hold the nail, and you can just glue them in. Steve Carmichael did it when he built a guitar out of a 2x4. I strongly recommend watching his video about that.
Here's a link to Steve's old video. It was great.
And I used for markers, I just had some 1/2-inch plugs laying around that I drilled in, put in, sanded it all down before putting my frets in, cutting my slots deeper. And fretting is a very
I cringed when I saw that second fret up. How about you?
difficult process, but doing something like this isn't too hard because it's all very flat and straight. Cut your slot, make sure it's deep enough for the tang of the fret, put a little bit of super glue in there, and hammer it in. The hard part is making them all smooth, even, and feel good, which we're going to get to next. Now, this is just a piece of scrap steel that I put some sandpaper on. It's a nice flat surface, and I wanted to make all those frets nice and flat, so I sanded them down flat. I sanded the edges of them flat on the belt sander, which you're not supposed to do because you could heat them up and unseat them, but with the crazy glue in there and stuff, I wasn't too worried, and it all worked out pretty well.
I had nowhere near the tools then that I do now, especially like the specific little guitar making tools, which was sort of the impetus of that video I put out a few years ago showing some of these DIY guitar tools you can create yourself instead of buying the expensive stuff. It can still happen with them.
Now the bridge, I cut from another cut off of that same teak, and I was just sort of experimenting. I looked at some pictures of bridges, I tried some different tools and techniques, and I ended up using the sanders a lot to just sort of sand down and shape the bridge the way I wanted it. Of course, resulting in lots of hand sanding. I drilled 4 holes in, spanning the distance of 1.5 inches, evenly spread out from beginning to end for the strings. And that's where you're going to tie the strings. And then I cut a little slot where I'm going to cut this scrap ebony piano key to use as my actual bridge that the strings will sit on. I also made a nut out of the same ebony coming up. A lot of sanding. You should probably not do it like that, but I'm not afraid to get a little bit of a sandpaper scar. And just so you know, ebony is considered kind of toxic, so you should probably wear a mask. I don't know what I was thinking when I cut this headstock, but I had to really cram those tuners in there and also make them turn the wrong direction at times. So you might want to think that through a little better than me. And it was too thin, so I had to make these little plastic spacers because the guitar tuners I had laying around were too tall.
I honestly don't know why I didn't just glue a little piece of wood to the back.
You could also get the right tuners, but well, that's not really my style. So then I glued the fingerboard on, and I glued the bridge on. I used wood glue on parts and then epoxy on other parts. There's a little bit of, cutting your slots, which I got the measurements off the internet, putting it all together. I bought these strings at a music store, but I think next time I'll just buy them at a bait and tackle shop because they just look like fishing line to me. And I also ended up adding some screws to the bridge just to make sure it would stay down nice and tight. Probably unnecessary.
And notice I put that logo in upside down. That's so me. I was right. I do call it Boycott Black Friday. What the heck was that guy talking about? So, all these years later, I admit this thing isn't played all that often, but it still works, as you can see, and it's just the same as it was then. And it's like a valued sort of, member of our home, unlike some, piece of garbage that you might buy at some store that was made overseas or whatever. And so I think that's the spirit of giving and of sharing that I subscribe to, and maybe you do too. It's not about how much money you have and how much money you can spend or what's in right now. It's about how you can better someone's life and show them how you care for them and love them with your own hands or heart rather than your wallet. So you're probably all on board with all that anyways, but spread the word. Let's live through actions rather than purchases. All right, be good. I don't know why I didn't finish the fretboard.